My name is Amanda Cammalleri, and I'll be presenting on exercise, mindfulness, and nutrition today as part of the research seminar series. So I'll start by talking about what brain health is and why it matters. Then I'll go into what some methods are to improve brain health, current gaps in the research, and then I'll talk about our exciting Impact 360 study and how you can get involved. So to start, what is a healthy brain? When we first think about a healthy brain, we might think of one that can learn, read, or study. But what about a brain that's healthy enough to express itself through intricate movement and sound processing required to play the violin? What about a brain healthy enough to control the limbs of the body and surpass discomfort, allowing us to move in very unique ways? What about a brain healthy enough to have the creativity and fine motor skills, allowing us to create beautiful art? And what about a brain healthy enough to perform things that we might take for granted, like having a conversation, walking, or even sleeping well? What about when something happens to a healthy brain, like disease or injury? At which point do we say that a brain is healthy or no longer healthy? Is brain health the absence of disease, or is brain health the ability to do certain things? And if so, where do we draw the line? What is brain health? Currently, there's no way to define brain health, but we can capture it with a scientific approach to the best of our abilities. We can look at the brain biologically by looking at certain markers, and I'll go through a few of those with you now. So we can look at the brain directly by using magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, or diffusion tensor imaging, DTI. And we can look at gray matter, or the number of cells in the brain, and connectivity, or the connections between different cells in the brain, often referred to as white matter. Indirectly, we can measure systems or functions that contribute to the health of the brain or that are really correlated to brain health. One example of that is quality of sleep. And this can be measured subjectively by giving people psychological questionnaires or tests, or objectively in the lab using a sleep test or polysomnography. Inflammation is another indirect example of brain health. And this is how our immune system reacts to injury. For example, when we get a cut, our body's inflammatory response reacts to it. And inflammation can be acute or short-lived, or it can be chronic, lasting weeks, months, or even years. Inflammation throughout the body can negatively impact cognitive function and can lead to symptoms such as depression, loss of motivation, and loss of appetite. We can measure this inflammation in the body, or systemic inflammation, by measuring elements of the body's immune response, or cytokines, and we can do this using blood tests. And finally, we can look at the microbiome. So in the gut, we have billions of microbes that send signals to the brain directly and indirectly. A new field of research is finding an increased relationship between the gut and the brain, and we can look at this using fecal samples. So next, how can we improve brain health? And I'll be talking about three main ways to improve brain health today. You guessed it: exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness. I'll briefly discuss the main themes of that research with you, and I'll go through some research on exercise, nutrition, and meditation, or mindfulness individually, but really keep in mind that there's value in looking at a combination of these techniques. So here we have all of the measures of direct and indirect measures of brain health or wellness, and the three interventions I'll be explaining. We'll start with exercise. Exercise has been shown to increase the number of cells in the brain, gray matter, and how connected they are to one another. It's also been shown to improve subjective ratings of quality of sleep. So after exercise interventions, people have reported falling asleep more quickly, sleeping longer, and waking up less throughout the night. While more research still needs to be done, studies examining exercise interventions have found lower levels of the elements released during inflammation after exercise interventions, indicating improvements in inflammation. Physical activity has also been shown to reduce the risk of several disorders of the gastrointestinal tract, including gastric ulcers, irritable bowel syndrome, and diverticulitis. with animal studies showing significant changes in gastrointestinal flora with physical activity. However, in humans, there's been evidence of improvements in the gut microbiome after exercise interventions, but still more research needs to be done. Moving on to nutrition, studies looking at the Mediterranean diet, or a diet that's very high in fruit and vegetable content and healthy omega-3 fats, have found increases in neuronal growth. Different fruits and vegetables are abundant in various molecules that have been shown to improve cognition. Some research suggests that a certain micronutrient found in many fruits and vegetables, polyphenols, can lead to neuron growth and more connectivity. However, again, more research needs to be done studying this effect in people. When it comes to sleep quality and nutrition, while evidence is strong for the effects of caffeine and stimulants on sleep, research is still not consistent when it comes to a specific diet to improve sleep. And when it comes to inflammation, decreases in the elements produced during inflammation, pro-inflammatory cytokines, have been found with the Mediterranean diet. And as you can imagine, what we eat directly affects our gut and our microbiome. So diets high in fibrous fruits and vegetables contribute to a healthy gut, although this does vary between individuals. Finally, looking at mindfulness interventions, these interventions show that meditation can increase connectivity and number of cells in the brain. They've been shown to improve subjective measures of sleep. So again, if you ask people how well they slept after a mindfulness intervention or even during, they'll often report having slept better. Mindfulness interventions have also been shown to reduce the same components of inflammation as exercise, although this literature is still inconsistent. And more research still needs to be done when it comes to the effect of a mindfulness intervention on the microbiome. So overall here, I've shown you 3 separate interventions as standalone interventions and how they've been shown to impact the brain directly and indirectly through all of the outcome measures mentioned. And you can see positive effects. And again, that more research needs to be done. I can't explain that enough. So it's useful to study the 3 of these in combination, as this may be more representative of a real-world intervention or real-world lifestyle changes than each one of these in isolation, as I just mentioned. So oftentimes, if we decide to sign up and start training for a half marathon, for example, we might also change our nutrition to support us in that. Or if we start doing yoga, there's a mindfulness component of that as well. So real world examples do involve often these in combination. Additionally, studies have been done on only single interventions, and these may miss out on potential cumulative or interactive effects. So it would be really interesting to look at these in combination. And a combination of these treatments has not been looked at before. Studies have looked at exercise and mindfulness together, and those studies support research I just explained. And studies have looked at nutrition and exercise together, again, supporting that research, but no study has looked at all 3 of these. And then you can ask, what about studying the holistic effects? So since the brain and body are so highly interconnected, looking at multiple measures of health impacting both would be useful for a better understanding of the mechanistics and what's happening. We need to look at the whole body, the whole picture, not just one component or one outcome measure in isolation. By taking a comprehensive view of the body and brain, this could allow for personalized interventions in the future. We know that health can change differently for different people, and by studying this in the entire body, it could allow for a personalized approach down the line. So taking the promising research behind the effects of exercise, mindfulness, and nutrition, combined with the importance of studying all 3 modalities in the entirety of the body, this led us to launching our new study, Impact 360. So this study will be a 360-degree examination of the effects of a multimodal therapy that includes exercise, mindfulness, and nutrition. It will look at how overall health is impacted by this combined intervention, and we'll be examining this impact from all angles or 360 degrees. We'll be looking at 60 healthy older adults aged 50 to 75. And our study design is as follows. It's a partial crossover study design, meaning we'll have an intervention group and a waitlist group. The intervention and waitlist will last 6 months, and the waitlist group will have the intervention after that 6 months for another 6 months, meaning the waitlist group will be a part of the study for 1 year. Assessments will be taken at time point 1 baseline, time point 2, and time point 3 for the waitlist group only. The exercise component of the intervention will involve 3 one-hour sessions per week at a medium to high intensity, and this will be done over Zoom. In fact, all of the interventions will be delivered over Zoom using UBC Zoom video conferencing. And exercises and intensity will progress over time. The nutrition intervention will follow the MIND diet, or the Mediterranean intervention for neurodegenerative delay. And this is very similar to the Mediterranean diet. It's very high in fruits and vegetables and healthy fats, and low in processed foods, sugars, and red meats. And this will involve biweekly nutrition and cooking classes based off of this diet. And participants will be asked to adhere to this diet as closely as possible, completing 3-day food journals. Finally, for the mindfulness intervention, there will be 15-minute meditation sessions after exercise classes, so 3 times a week, and 8 weeks of a brief mindfulness-based stress reduction MBSR course, followed by 8 weeks of an MBSR follow-on course focused on feeling tone, with a month of biweekly discussion sessions after the first MBSR and at the end of the study. So that's a lot of information for the interventions, and I thought this slide might make it a little bit more clear on what this timeline looks like for participants. So exercise will involve 3 one-hour exercise classes per week for the entirety of the intervention. Mindfulness will involve 3 15-minute sessions per week following those exercise ones. Mindfulness will also involve MBSR training, followed by biweekly discussions, MBSR 2 training, again, followed by biweekly discussions. And nutrition will involve biweekly nutrition education and cooking classes for the entirety of the study. So the total time commitment per week for the interventions ranges from around 5 hours to around 6 hours. And as I mentioned, the brain, we can measure brain health directly and indirectly. So with this study, we really want to look at all of the effects of our intervention in the brain and body to the best of our ability, of course. So we'll be looking at cognition, and we'll be doing that using the NIH Toolbox Cognitive Battery Test. We'll be looking at blood markers for inflammation, brain imaging using MRI of gray matter and connectivity, sleep quality using questionnaires and the Fitbits, emotional well-being using several different questionnaires and the NIH Toolbox Emotional Battery, heart health looking at blood pressure and heart rate, gut health looking at the microbiome using fecal samples, and finally fitness levels with an exercise test and different tests of balance and gait. So by now, you know, hopefully a little more about how these 3 interventions and their effects, about these 3 interventions and how they may affect directly and indirectly brain health. No other study has examined these 3 interventions together or this extensive list of outcome measures. We expect to see some combinatorial effects of these interventions, and we'll be exploring the mechanisms with our outcome measures to contribute to the current state of science. So if you're interested in contributing to this exciting new research by participating in our study, the exciting news is ethics has just been approved and we're now recruiting. So you can feel free to call me or email me if you're interested, and we can reach out to you for a preliminary phone screening. And before I finish today, I would just like to send a big thank you to the Cresswell Lab for all of their help and support as we designed this study and prepared to launch this huge study. They've been very helpful, along with the BC Brain Wellness Program, and a specific shout out to Matthew Sakeli, Emily Gerson, Katie Chen, Alex Barbara Cross, and Darius Darabi, as well as Sally Stelling. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for listening and being here today.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your project with us. It's really amazing to hear about the integration of exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness into just one study. Some questions have come up in the chat, which we would love to get your expertise on. One question is whether there is a dose response for mindfulness in terms of brain health. So does longer intervention mean better results?
This is a great question. And it's interesting because there is a clear dose response with exercise. However, when we look at mindfulness interventions, they have been more inconsistent throughout the literature. And this is often due to the expertise of the instructor, the types of interventions differing between studies. If we look at MBSR specifically, which has been studied a lot in the literature, there does tend to be a dose response with people who are adhering more closely to the MBSR by doing all of the homework, showing better results when it comes to at least inflammatory markers and neural connectivity. And stress levels. That one is very clear in the research.
Cool, thank you. There's also been some questions coming up more related to recruitment. First, would you be able to put the contact info up again?
Yes, I breezed through that.
In case anybody wants to contact you. Beautiful. And we were also wondering if participants need to live in the Vancouver area.
So participants do not need to live in the Vancouver area. They do need to live in BC for safety purposes, especially during the exercise interventions. And the assessments will involve 3 days of assessments that will be at UBC. So if you live farther off in BC, but are able to come in for 3 days every 6 months, then that's fine.
Awesome. And are you looking to recruit only healthy people or people that may have a neurological condition?
Currently, we are looking to recruit only healthy participants. However, what we would like to do with more funding in the future is replicate this in several different populations, such as a Parkinson's population, a stroke population, an MS population, and more, because we do believe in this research. Yeah, but for now, this is a pilot on healthy participants only.
Awesome. And is there an age requirement for the study?
Yes, 50 to 75 years old.
Cool. Another question that came up is what exactly assessments might entail, considering you're examining many different things.
Absolutely. I'm just going to leave this page for a moment. If anyone would like it, we can put it in the chat for you afterwards. Let me just go. Okay. So here we have all of our assessments. As I mentioned, there are many things we'll be assessing. So day 1 of assessments will include an MRI scan, a diet questionnaire, and collecting blood. Day 2 will involve clinical and physical measurements, just like blood pressure, weight, height, functional outcome tests. So just a few measures of balance and gait, an exercise test to get your VO2 max, and a 10-minute DEXA scan to understand your body composition. And then the 3rd day will be cognitive testing, and then answering a couple questionnaires and a hearing test, but this will only be done for baseline assessments. And these may come in a different order, and they won't necessarily be 3 days in a row, but we will be sectioning off the assessments into different days, and there will be 3. I hope that's clear. If there are any follow-up questions on that, feel free to let me know.
Cool. And will travel costs be reimbursed by UBC?
Yes.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Amanda, for your time and expertise. We'll now move on to our next speaker, Mikey Jose, who is also a PhD neuroscience student with a keen interest in integrating music into neuroscience. Mikey's research is incredibly unique in that it bridges the gap between the arts and the health fields. Music plays a crucial role in everyday life and clinical settings, and Mikey's study looks to validate this role by exploring how audio interventions can be used to alleviate apathy in Parkinson's disease. So to dive deeper into this study, I'll pass it off to Mikey himself.
Thanks so much, Alex. And thank you everybody for joining us today. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about a different type of intervention. Today's theme really is all about lifestyle intervention. So different things that we can do every single day to either help prevent disease or disorder states, or to just maintain basically brain and mental health. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about a specific symptom called apathy, and hoping to see if we can target apathy with an audio-based intervention, specifically in Parkinson's disease. So the game plan for today is to just go over the background of the study, looking at specifics of the study's aims, what we hope to achieve. Sorry, can everybody still see my slides up here? I think things are, is that all good, Alex? Okay, great.
Looks good.
So, thanks. The background, the study's aims, what we basically hope to target, and the outcomes that we're hoping to see, the study design and the intervention that's involved here, and then finally looking out the outcomes and significance of what the study is, which, as Alex premised, is something that's really important and a gap that needs to be filled in the research. So first, to talk a little bit about the background of this study is really focused on Parkinson's disease. And so in Parkinson's disease, really the hallmark of what we recognize as Parkinson's are motor symptoms. So things like rigidity, as well as tremor. But in this study, we're really focused and interested on the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's. And things like that include apathy. And apathy is defined as this decreased motivational state, decreased goal-directed behavior. So things like standing up, going out for a walk, getting out of bed. These are some types of activities that are impacted with participants who have apathy in Parkinson's. Now, it turns out the prevalence of apathy in Parkinson's is quite high. In early stages, it's about 25% of Parkinson's participants display apathy and a clinical level of apathy. And then throughout the progression, this prevalence even goes up to 70 and 75% in some studies. So it's important to note that apathy is a distinct symptom and diagnosis from other things that impact mood, such as depression and anhedonia. And apathy is independently linked in Parkinson's with decreased daily functioning, as well as quality of life, and also treatment resistance as well. So there seems to be this significant gap in that there are no drugs or pharmacological treatments that target apathy specifically in Parkinson's. So there seems to be this need for some kind of supplementary clinical intervention to help target apathy in Parkinson's disease. Now, it turns out that music and audio interventions have been used to target apathy, as well as other symptoms in different clinical populations, as well as in healthy populations. And so, in everyday life, what I want you to do is maybe think about a song or an audiobook or something that sparks kind of joy when you listen to it. It motivates you, it gets you moving. So whether that be Frank Sinatra or Michael Bublé, that kind of special song or those special songs that get you to motivated and moving, those tend to actually activate a part of our brains called the reward network. And the reward network processes different types of motivational stimuli, things like music, as well as food and money and other types of rewarding stimuli. So it turns out that when we listen to rewarding music, like the songs that you're thinking about, it actually activates the same reward networks. And so what we're interested in is seeing basically what these areas of the brain are doing when listening to music, and how it can perhaps target these areas of the brain that are impacted with those who have apathy. Now, there is another finding that showed what is called increased functional connectivity, or basically two areas of the brain that talk to each other a little bit more when listening to music, between the auditory centers of the brain, parts of the brain that processes sound, as well as different types of audio, and our reward centers, the areas of our brain that we've just been talking about. So with all this research, there have been a lot of trials that, and I'm sure that some of you might have some personal experiences listening to music, and it has shown really to be effective in alleviating things like apathy. And in some broader studies looking at in patients with dementia, it has been shown, and pleasurable and rewarding music has been shown to reduce apathy in these populations. Now, the gap here is nobody really knows and understands how this is working. We know that music provides some type of therapeutic effect, that it can alter mood, but we don't really know what's happening inside of the brain when this is happening. And this is really important to know in order for researchers and scientists to target interventions to help people with specific types of disorders or symptoms, things like apathy and Parkinson's. So the main study's aim is to really answer and address this question, to understand how audio and music might work to alleviate and reduce apathy, specifically in Parkinson's disease. Now, this aim can be broken down into smaller aims that we also hope to answer and address in this study. So the first aim really is to look again at this brain connectivity, how the brain regions talk to each other, and the differences in Parkinson's patients with apathy, as well as those without apathy, to see if there are any baseline differences there. Then we're interested in looking at the effects of audio stimulation and audio stimuli on these different measures of apathy. And in this study, we'll be looking at clinical measures of apathy, so your standardized paper and pen tests of apathy, as well as these functional measures, so looking at brain activity and seeing if these areas of the reward networks or if we're observing any activity in them, as well as behavioral measures. Our third aim is to really observe any changes over an audio listening intervention period. So there will be an interventional period where we will ask participants to go home and listen to some type of audio over 8 weeks. And that's something that I'll be delving into a little bit more when I break down the schedule of how this timeline of the study will go. And finally, we want to test if there are any lasting effects of the intervention. That is, if we stop the intervention, audio intervention at a certain point, will these effects or these therapeutic effects that we hope to see, will that actually last over a longer period of time when that intervention stops? So in terms of those who are able to participate and those who are unfortunately unable to participate in this particular study, our inclusion criteria are those who are between the ages of 40 and 85 with a clinical diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. They will have to be on the on state, which basically means that they're on medication, only Levodopa. The exclusion criteria for the study are those with atypical Parkinsonism, epilepsy or other neurological diseases or complications, as well as significant cognitive impairment. So really being able to understand how the study will go and being able to do this on their own time during the intervention is really important. Moderate depression, those with moderate depression, and those with severe and multiple head traumas will also have to be excluded from the study. And also, because there is an MRI portion or a magnetic resonance imaging part of the study, which basically involves being placed into a scanner with a large magnet that surrounds them, those who have metal implants or medical implants that are somewhat magnetic will also have to be excluded because of due to safety concerns and issues. Now, in terms of the study design and how this will all run through, there will be basically 3 main in-person visits at the Center for Brain Health, just like Amanda's study here. So the first 2 visits will be on each end of an 8-week intervention, as we spoke about a little bit earlier. And the 8-week intervention really just involves listening to some kind of audio intervention for about an hour a day, every single day. And there will be weekly check-in points for that. Now, the visits 1 and 2 at the end, at the beginning and end of this 8-week intervention will involve a mixture of clinical assessments, so a lot of paper and pen tests, cognitive tests, and batteries, things like that. Looking at apathy measures, of course, as our primary outcome, and then looking at hearing as well to make sure that those who are participating have a level of hearing that will be appropriate for this type of study. And then finally, in visits 1 and 2, there will also be an fMRI task, which is basically a fancy way of saying, for those who have actually done MRIs before, it's the same type of machine, but all we're looking at in this case and in this scenario is activity in the brain. So you'll be, those who are participating will be undergoing some type of activities while their brain is being scanned, and that is happening on visits 1 and 2. Finally, on visit 3, there will be, this will be after a 4 weeks off period. So after the stopping of the intervention, the audio intervention, we will ask participants to come back for one final checkup 4 weeks later to see if any of these effects have stayed or if they went away. So finally, for the outcomes and significance of the study, there are neurological outcomes and significance, clinical applications, as well as a large potential for translating this into other brain states and other neurological disorders. So in terms of a neurological significance, we're really understanding and getting underneath these mechanisms and pathways of apathy in Parkinson's disease, and really understanding what the brain is doing during these types of tasks and how we can target this. In terms of clinical context and settings, we are very proudly partnered and funded by the Rick's Heart Foundation, who really is a big proponent for using and utilizing music-based interventions in clinical settings. So this type of research will really help validate this use of auditory and music interventions in widespread clinical contexts, whether it be in Parkinson's patients, those with Alzheimer's disease, and other disease states. And finally, we hope that this research will be translatable and into developing novel interventions and understanding different populations. So right now we're focused on Parkinson's disease and apathy, but in the future, this might be able to be applied to those, again, with Alzheimer's disease, with different types and forms of dementia, as well as other neurological disorders, and those as well who are healthy agers. Because we see and have evidence that music is impactful and rewarding, then hopefully we'll be able to use the results from this research and translate this to other populations. Now, I would like to acknowledge the BC Brain Wellness Program, Rick's Heart Foundation, and Pacific Parkinson's Research Institute for supporting this research, as well as Dr. Silke Cresswell, Dr. Laura Boyd, and Dr. Silke Louie, who from Northeastern University in Boston, for helping support this project as well. And very happily, I can announce as well that along with Amanda's study, that we are also recruiting right now for participants. So if any of the criteria that popped up today in the presentation applies to you, or if you're unsure, then please reach out to me. I think I'll be a little bit faster through email, so my email is already up here as well, but we also have a phone number, and I'll be happy to answer some questions about this. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mikey. It sounds like music can be just such an incredibly powerful tool, and it's so interesting to hear about how your study looks to target the gap of knowledge around apathy. Yeah, we would love for you to answer some questions that have been sent in. It looks like one question is asking why it's important to understand what is happening in the brain when you already know that music seems to help.
This is a great question. Especially in the realm of music neuroscience, the previous perspective on this was, we know it works. We know that we can kind of figure out that listening to music makes us happy. Why do we need to look into the brain to actually validate that this is something that we should be using in clinical settings? And what research has been finding is really when we see the research in looking at music-based interventions on alleviating these types of things, the types of music interventions are vast. So this can be from playing music out loud or actually engaging in active music, music production. So things like singing or drum circles. So there are a lot of different ways in which we can engage with music in our day-to-day lives. And there hasn't been any streamlined understanding of which elements of these types of things actually contribute towards this alleviation. So the importance of seeing what's kind of happening under the hood is so that we can understand these are the elements of these interventions that might be able to produce these effects in the brain. So if we know what's happening in the brain, then we can perhaps go back and almost target development for future and novel types of interventions, music-based interventions that can target not just apathy, but other symptoms and disease states as well. So it's a really important question, and it's something that we're happy to kind of be on board with, and this is something that's growing in the field as well.
Awesome. Another attendee is wondering if you know yet when the study is going to start.
Yes, so we are in recruitment phase right now, and we are gearing up for some pilot testing as well. So if you are interested and you think that you qualify for this type of study, you can reach out to me in my email here, and I can drop it in the chat as well. And we can start setting you up with looking at some type of screening as well.
Cool. And they were wondering if you need any musical background or if you need to regularly listen to podcasts to participate.
Good question. So no, the nice thing about the study is for those who are fans of music, who like music, this is a great study for you. For those who aren't a big proponent of listening to music every single day, that's all right as well. And that may perhaps we'll be able to see some kind of effects or in that way as well. For those who listen to podcasts or don't listen to podcasts, really this study, as long as you fit the inclusion and exclusion criteria, musical background and things like that don't really matter.
Cool. And if someone doesn't have an official diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, but would still like to participate in the study, are they still able to do so?
That's a good question. So I have had a couple of people so far reach out to me saying that they're unsure, that they feel like they have some kind of symptoms that might suggest Parkinson's. And because we need a clinical diagnosis, I would recommend that you visit your clinic and perhaps the Pacific Parkinson's and Movement Disorders Clinic at UBC, or any other clinic that can give you a clinical diagnosis in order for us to help you move forward with this study.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Mikey, for such an interesting presentation for such an important project. We really appreciate it. Our last speaker for today's session will be Shayan Keymanesh, who we are so grateful to be here to speak on his upcoming project on dietary interventions in Parkinson's disease. So Shayan began with a degree in behavioral neuroscience from Simon Fraser University here in Vancouver, and is now a master's student in the Department of Neuroscience here at UBC. With an interest in the biology underlying neurological disorders and how lifestyle interventions can affect them, Shayan is beginning a study on the effects of ketogenic diets on the health of patients with Parkinson's disease. So I'll pass it over to Shayan to tell us more on that.
And hello to everyone who's taken the time to join us for this talk. My name is Shayan, and I'm going to talk to you about one of the exciting research studies that we have in the lab. We're going to begin shortly, and I'm going to explain to you a little what it entails, what it's all about, and what we are trying to find out. So to begin with, I am going to try to get my computer to work first. Okay. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the background and the rationale of the study. Why are we asking these questions that we're asking? And then I will move on to what are the specific study aims and some of the specifics about the study design and our interventions. And lastly, we will wrap up by quickly talking about the outcomes and the significance of the study. So to begin with, I would like to preface this talk by mentioning that there has been a lot of interest in using dietary interventions to treat neurodegenerative disorders and neurological conditions in general. And that has been the case for the past couple of years. Parkinson's disease is no exception to that rule. Usually these dietary interventions, they try to target very specific disease mechanism. And I can give you two different examples with respect to Parkinson's disease right now. The first one pertains to gut symptoms of Parkinson's disease. These symptoms are very peculiar as they often occur very early in the progression of the disease. They often predate the onset of motor symptoms. by a couple of years. And they respond really well to some of the dietary interventions that my colleagues have mentioned, including the Mediterranean diet. What is really interesting about this is that the gut symptoms, including the constipation, they correlate with changes in the gut microbiome, or the collection of microorganisms that live within the gastrointestinal tract of the humans and are essential for maintaining a healthy gut. They contribute to a lot of regulatory processes that happen within our bodies. So that's one example, Mediterranean diets for gut health. Another example of dietary regimens being utilized for treating specific mechanisms of a disease is a ketogenic diet. And this specific disease mechanism that we're talking about with respect to the ketogenic diet is a bioenergetic deficit. This basically means that your body is unable to utilize glucose as its primary fuel source as efficiently as possible. Think about your body as a car. If it's running on normal fuel, normal gas, and all of a sudden just is not able to utilize that gasoline as efficiently as possible, now you have to think about an alternative way to provide it with another alternative fuel. And that's what ketogenic diets do. They provide an alternative form of fuel, and that's exactly what ketogenic means. It means that these diets are capable of producing an alternative type of fuel known as ketone bodies that can be utilized by the neurons, the cells of the brain, and they help the neurons to continue conducting their activity without aggravating or adding to the disease mechanism. However, the ketogenic diets have been tested in, at least in Parkinson's disease and in other disorders before, in small pilot trials. They have shown to be useful. They have shown some promise in ameliorating some of the symptoms associated with it, with Parkinson's disease. One thing that has not yet been considered when applying these diets to the different disorders is their effect on the gut microbiome. At least in the context of Parkinson's disease. When it's been tested in other cohorts, it's been shown that it might not be the best thing for the gut microbiome. However, we still don't know definitive answers. More research needs to be done. And we started asking ourselves, is there a way to utilize the components of the ketogenic diet while ensuring that the gut health is also being preserved, and also we're not doing anything to damage the gut health? And our answer to that question was, what if we try to combine the components of the Mediterranean diet, which we know to be good for gut health, we know it to be healthy, with components of a ketogenic diet, which we know is going to be good for the so-called bioenergetic deficits. And we came up with two potential solutions, or the interventions of this trial, namely a Mediterranean ketogenic diet and also a Mediterranean diet supplemented with a ketogenic supplement known as MCT oil, or medium chain triglyceride oil. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in future slides, but these are the potential solutions that we have in mind. So with the background and the rationale of this study out of the way, let's talk about what we're trying to determine with this study. Our main goal with this study is to determine whether the ketogenic Mediterranean diet style interventions are safe and feasible. These are the main two objectives that we have. And of course, we're investigating these two interventions in a Parkinson's disease cohort. So in specific terms, we are going to examine the safety with respect to gut microbiome and gut health in general. We're going to determine feasibility with respect to adherence and how likely the participants are to continue adhering to these diets over a long period of time. And lastly, we are going to explore some of the clinical and biological outcomes related to these dietary interventions. So how are we going to investigate these aims? The study will begin by, of course, the consenting process. After the willing participants consent to continuing into the study, they will be screened for the eligibility criteria, which I will show you in the next slide. After that, we ask the participants to come to the UBC lab to conduct a pre-intervention visit. This would be visit number 1. We collect some samples that we can use to study the gut microbiome and the biological markers of the disease. So that will be basically a blood sample and a fecal sample. And then the participants will be randomized into one of the two interventions of the trial. So that'll be either a Mediterranean diet, a Mediterranean ketogenic diet, or a Mediterranean diet supplemented with MCT oil. These dietary interventions will last for 8 weeks, after which there will be an 8 weeks of a washout period. In other words, during the next 8 weeks following the completion of an intervention, the participants will just go back to their lifestyles before the start of the study. And basically, they will do nothing that is related to the study, aside from maybe a few phone check-ins from us, just to see how everything is going. And after that, there will be another pre-intervention visit. That will be visit number 3, where we ask the participants to come back to UBC. We conduct another round of assessments and sample collections. And this time, the participant will follow the other intervention. So if they started with the Mediterranean ketogenic diet, now they will start with the Mediterranean diet supplemented with MCT or Medi-MCT diet. This will also be done for 8 weeks, and after the 8 weeks are complete, there will be a final study visit and another round of clinical assessments, sample collections, and also that would wrap up the study. These are some of the inclusion-exclusion criteria. There's, I believe this might be a summary of these criteria. I won't read them all for you. I would be more than happy to answer any questions with regards to them. But I guess some of the most important ones are being between the ages of 40 to 85, having a confirmed diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, being on relatively stable dopaminergic medication, and also not having any allergies to coconut oil, or MCT products. And the reason for that is because of our intervention Medi-MCT or Mediterranean diet supplemented with MCT oil. What is the MCT oil? MCT oil is an extract of coconut oil. It is an extract of the ketogenic fatty acids of coconut oil. The brand that we will be using is called Nutiva MCT. You might have seen it in grocery stores or health stores around town, because it is Health Canada approved and it is commercially available. The dose that we're going to be using is 2 tablespoons of MCT oil per day. However, we're going to start with a smaller dose of 1 teaspoon or 2 teaspoons per day, and then we're going to gradually increase our doses to reach the level of 2 tablespoons per day. And the Mediterranean component, my colleagues have already hashed out the details about them more beautifully than I can do right now, but it essentially entails encouraging more intake of green leafy vegetables, nuts, and fiber-rich grains, using fish and poultry as the main source of protein, and limiting the intake of food, sweets, and red meat consumption. The Mediterranean ketogenic diet is basically following the main principles of a ketogenic diet, but with a few alterations. We have taken out a few of the components of a normal ketogenic diet, so decreasing the intake of the dairies, decreasing the intake of the red meat in line with the Mediterranean diet principles. But in general, about 70 to 75% of the caloric intake per day is going to come from healthy fats. There's another difference between a classical ketogenic diet and a Mediterranean ketogenic diet. In this version, we're going to mostly rely on olive oil, avocados, coconut oil as the main source of fat that we're going to obtain. About 15 to 20% coming from fish and poultry as the main sources of protein. And we're going to increase the intake of carbohydrate, or the allowance for carbohydrate, to allow for higher intake of fiber-rich foods, vegetables, and grains, to balance out some of the gut health promoting aspects of the Mediterranean diet and ketogenic diet. This sort of diet has been tested in other cohorts before, especially in a Alzheimer's disease cohort, and it's shown a lot of promise in improving cognitive function and improving gut health. So we are really optimistic about what we can find and being able to utilize the benefits of this diet while maintaining a healthy gut. To track the adherence to these diets, we have a few different measures, weekly check-ins with a registered dietitian. The registered dietitian is going to be constantly in contact with the participants and provide them with guidance and check in, making sure that, everything with respect to following the diets is going smoothly as possible. We're going to track the food intake once per week through food diaries that we'll provide. And also we'll provide the participants with the device called the Freestyle Precision Neo. This is a glucose and ketone monitoring system. It's just like one of those devices that is commonly used for diabetes control. And we're going to obtain weekly blood ketone samples using this monitoring device. It's supposedly pain-free and very easy to use. So last step that I want to talk to you about are the main outcomes, what we're trying to achieve with this study, and what are some of the questions we're trying to answer. And basically, we're going to analyze the microbiology of the gut microbiome, the composition of the gut microbiome, to determine the importance of gut health, making sure that it's working well, there aren't any problems that pertain to gut health that might aggravate the disease pathology in the long term. And also we want to know whether these diets are doing what they're supposed to be doing, whether the participants like these diets or not, and whether they will be adhering to these diets in the long term or not. And also, this study is a part of our team's effort to establish safe and effective protocols using dietary interventions, ketogenic diet being just one of them. So this is just the first phase study. In the next phases of this sort of investigative question, we're going to ask a different sort of question. We're going to ask, how well do these diets do what they're supposed to be doing as compared to a diet that is a control diet? So how effective these diets are in total. And last but not least, this is a summary slide. I will just leave it up here. If you're interested in dietary interventions, or if you're interested in this study in particular, please feel free to contact me. My email is on the screen. I also have included the email of my other colleague that is responsible for this trial as well. There's a little bit of a summary here as well. And I'd like to thank you for your interest in science and in research in general. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Shayan. It'll be so valuable to see what effects the ketogenic diet might actually have. And it looks like we do have some questions as well. We would love to hear your input on. One being why you have a control diet as a treatment control group.
So very good question. We actually do not have a control diet for this particular study, because the main objective of this study is to determine the safety of the ketogenic Mediterranean style diets with respect to gut health. We are not really, we do not think that the effects of these diets on the gut microbiome is going to be driven by a placebo condition or by a placebo effect. So we want to really make sure to increase our analytic power, making sure that we can get as many samples as possible that are basically from the dietary conditions to analyze them with respect to the safety markers that we have. So basically compromising having a placebo condition or a control group in favor of having more analytic power, trying to get a stronger safety signal that we can interpret later. Hopefully
Cool.
that answered the question.
Yeah. And will participants be provided meal plans for these diets?
Yes, we will be providing meal plans and recipes for these diets. Well, actually, the registered dietitian will be doing that. There will also be weekly check-ins that will go over these meal plans and weekly recipes to make sure that it is to the participants' liking and it's easy to follow.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Shayan, and thank you immensely to all the speakers here today. Amanda, Mikey, and Shayan, we're so excited to see where your studies go, and it was absolutely lovely to hear about the process and your knowledge so far. I also want to deeply thank everyone for joining us here today. I've really enjoyed learning alongside you all.